You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today I continue on with my Meet the Coaches series of the USFL with the team that I root for in the USFL, the New Orleans Breakers. So my Breakers fans, comment down below. Let me know how you're feeling about this year's coaching staff. Got ourselves a new head coach leading the way for the Breakers, so there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to go through all the coaches that are going to be on the sidelines this season, and then we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into the head coach, offensive and defensive coordinator. So without further ado, let's dive on in, shall we? Oh, and be sure, if you haven't already, if you're just a general USFL fan, you're enjoying some spring football, I'm doing all the teams on this one here, not just the Breakers. Check out my other ones. I think I have 4 done now. Well, this will be number 4, so just about half the league done, and we'll have it all wrapped up before the start of the actual season. So diving right into things, again, we will dive into all of the coaches that will be on the sidelines for this second season of the USFL, starting off with the head coach, and he's also going to double as the quarterback's coach, John DeFilippo, a very experienced and tenured offensive coach. We'll get into him more in just a little bit. The offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach is going to be Doug Martin. The defensive coordinator and secondaries coach is going to be Jon Tenuta, I believe that's pronounced. Linebackers is going to be led by Jon Tenuta. Offensive line and run game coordinator is going to be Jim Turner. The defensive line coach is going to be Cornell Brown. Special teams coordinator and running backs coach will be Kirk Dahl. And then assistant defensive backs coach and defensive quality control will be Hunter Hughes, and then tight ends coach and offensive quality control will be TJ Verneri, I believe that's pronounced. And then the general manager leading the entire operation is Ryan Jones. Now, those will be everyone you see on the sideline. Let's take a little bit of a deep dive, get to know some of these coaches if you're somebody who's new to the USFL, or maybe just somebody who, follow along last year loosely, but don't necessarily know who these coaches are. We'll talk about, again, the head coach and the 2 coordinators, beginning with the head coach, John DeFilippo, somebody whose coaching career, at least professionally between college and the NFL, dates all the way back to 2000 with the Fordham Rams of New York. He's a Super Bowl champion with the Philadelphia Eagles as a quarterback coach. He was able to make Carson Wentz look like an MVP, and then once when he went down, help Nick Foles lead the Eagles all the way to an improbable Super Bowl victory over the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 52. So the guy has been to the big dance and been successful in a pretty unorthodox way, if I do say so myself. He's an offensive-minded head coach. He's always been on the offensive side of the ball, and basically his tenure consists of quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator for the vast majority. Now, I will say this. I am excited to see how this pans out. The Breakers were pretty strong at quarterback last year prior to when Kyle Sloter dealt with that injury, and he got that midpoint into the season. Memory's a little bit fuzzy, but offensively, the Breakers, when it came to their passing game last year, was pretty awesome to watch. And to know that you have a head coach in John DeFilippo who's going to lean into that, because if you look at his offensive coordinator stints, or at least his last 3, with the Browns in 2015, the Vikings in 2018, and the Jaguars in 2019, his teams were not afraid to pass the football. They not led the league, but in terms of NFL rankings, were 11th in passing attempts, 6th in passing attempts, and 12th in passing attempts, respectively, of those 3 teams I just named off. And when you look at when he was the Eagles quarterback coach in 2017, they were also 13 in passing attempts, which is the lowest on the list here. But when you think back to that team, they were pretty damn good when it came to running the football. So kind of explains why. I'm assuming he would not have been afraid to throw the football, considering how efficient Carson Wentz looked that year and how strong Nick Foles did in the playoff run that they had there at the end of the season. But the way I see this is that we're probably going to see another year of fairly aggressive passing from the Breakers, especially with the departure of running back Jordan Ellis. I think that we're going to see, and with the commitment to a quarterback like McLeod Bethel-Thompson, who's an aged veteran, I guess you could say. He has been around the block, and he's been a quarterback for quite some time, and he has been in a handful of places throughout his tenure as a QB. We're probably going to see more of an aggressive passing attack just because there's kind of the unknown at that running back spot. And you also have a pretty strong group of receivers led by Jonathan Adams and Johnny Dixon, who are returning from last season. I fully expect this team to be a pass-first team. Not to say I don't expect to see them run the football at all, and maybe we don't see a surprise guy emerge from the running back core, but it really feels like the way this team is kind of structured right now, and with the unknown at the running back spot, with John DeFilippo leading the way and the way his offenses have kind of worked when he's been offensive coordinator in places, we're probably going to see a pretty hefty dose of passing the football, and I'm really excited to see how things shake out in that quarterback spot. Now, when we shift gears over to offensive coordinator Doug Martin, again, another guy with an absolute ton of experience. His coaching career dating back all the way to 1986 when he started as a graduate assistant for Kentucky. He landed his first head coaching gig in 2004 with Kent State. He was also head coach of New Mexico State as well from 2013 to 2021. He's literally done, it feels like, everything as far as offensive coaching is concerned. He's been a quarterback coach, a running back coach, a wide receivers, a tight ends coach. He's been an OC on multiple occasions. And again, he's been a head coach a couple of times for an extended period of time at that. This is someone who comes with a ton of experience. Now, some of you who may know Doug Martin might think, well, his record as a head coach, not necessarily the most impressive by any means. And you know what? Maybe it's not. However, there is something that I really like about his tenure as a head coach that I think is going to apply really well to the offense we're going to see from the Breakers this year. And that's his willingness to adapt to the player personnel that he has and let the offense be what it needs to be to at least try to get the most out of it. During his time at Kent State in the early portion, they weren't afraid to pass the football, and then there was a slight shift to where they were more aggressive with running the football. Julian Edelman was their quarterback for some time, and he was a very athletic and mobile quarterback during his time at Kent State before moving towards more of a balanced attack during the tail end of his time there. And you see the same type of willingness as well during his tenure in New Mexico State. There's a long time of him just running a more balanced offense to shifting to a little bit more of a pass first. I know it's like a slight running first, but it's very clear that there is a willingness for his offense to basically be whatever suits the strengths of his player personnel. And I really like that. I think that's a really good trait to have for an offensive coordinator. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing, because how does this offense shake out based off of what I talked about with John DeFilippo? Maybe it ends up being a very pass heavy first. And if, the wide receivers click with whoever ends up being the quarterback, maybe the team does lean that way. Maybe they find an unknown or, someone surprises in the running group that they have, the running back group that they have there, and then they become more of a run first team. One thing I do know is whatever seems to be working will probably be what you see from this team. It's not going to be we're forcing the pass, we're forcing the run in this situation. No, they will lean to their strengths, and I really like that. That's exactly the type of thing I want to see when, especially looking at like a spring league like this, where you get a lot of unknowns year in and year out because there's a lot of turnover. Players opt to go to other places, whether it's to the NFL or to another spring league or to the CFL, whatever it may be. You're looking at roster turnover, so you need to be willing to adapt to your strengths. You can't just go in, and not to take a shot at Kirby Wilson of the Maulers last year, but you can't go in and be like, this is what we're doing. No, you want to be able to figure out what your team's strengths are and then roll with it from there. I really feel like that's a really good philosophy to have, especially when you're talking spring football here, when you have a lot of guys that are trying to essentially prove themselves. You don't want to hinder somebody who could potentially be a star for you just because your offensive scheme or what you envision the offense looking like doesn't necessarily fit what they're the best at. You want to adapt to your player personnel. And on top of that, I'm hoping that also means everyone gets a wide open opportunity at the quarterback spot. Not having Kyle Sloter this year obviously leaves it up in the air. He is, though, a free agent now. I'm kind of hoping that maybe we get to see a reunion between he and the Breakers. Obviously, that may or may not happen, but I'm just saying, before Kyle Sloter got hurt last year, offense looked really good. Post Kyle Sloter injury, not as much, and I would like to see a potential reunion if the cards are on the table. Now, looking over to the other side of the football, talked a lot of offense here, and now we're going to focus in on the defense. Jon Tenuta, he's a returning coach. He was on the staff last year. This is another guy who has an absolute load of experience as a coach and kind of follows a recurring theme here with the coordinators. He goes all the way back to 1981 as a graduate assistant in Virginia. He's been a defensive backs coach, a defensive lines coach, a linebackers coach, a safeties coach, a defensive coordinator, and an assistant head coach. He's been just a defensive assistant. He has done what feels like just about every possible thing you can do as a defensive type of coach, which is, again, good. A lot of experience, a guy who can relate to every single person at every single position in terms of his players because he has worked with them individually at some point within his long and experienced, 40 plus years of coaching now that he has under his belt. When you look at how things looked last year for New Orleans, there was a lot to like. And for me, when I look at where the Breakers kind of fell short last year, like I said, the offense just kind of fell apart post Kyle Sloter injury. Things closed up for the run game because you didn't really have to be as honest with yourself as far as or not as with yourself, but with the opposing offense that you're going up against, because Kyle Sloter was hurt. It was very clear it was affecting his play. Defenses tightened things up. The passing game kind of got eliminated, and it closed things up for the running game. So the defense, strong for pretty much the entirety of the year, kind of was carrying the load at the tail end of the season. And, I don't really think there's too much that needs to be changed going into the second year. There's obviously some players that are gone from this group that we're going to have this year as opposed to who we saw from last year. But, you look at some of the numbers. First in points allowed per game. They were first in passing yards allowed per game. They were third in rushing yards allowed per game, and they were third in total yards allowed per game. They started off the season really hot getting after the quarterback those first couple of games, and it really started to kind of grind to a halt for what felt like almost 4 or 5 weeks before things kind of started to pick up again at the end of the season. So if there's one thing that I really want to see from this defense going into year number 2, it is a focus on just how can we open things up for our pass rushers who are going to be minus Davin Bellamy, who was awesome for the Breakers last year, or Davin Bellamy, I guess I should say. That was wrong pronunciation there. How can we open things up for some of the new guys that are going to be coming in and taking over those roles, and how can we get them to the quarterback, whether it's through, more aggressive blitzes or, just trying to cover things up, hiding things more, confusing your opposing offense, whatever you can come up with. It's looking like this is going to be a 4-3 type of defense just based off of how the defensive line is built up and some of the linebackers as well. When I just look at the numbers there based off of heights and weights and everything, it looks like it's going to be a 4-3 defense this year, which I personally prefer the structure of. That's always just been my cup of tea. I don't necessarily like 3-4 as much. I'm more of a 4-3 guy if I'm just being completely honest with you all. But I want to see guys like Ahmad Gooden or somebody like Henri St. Amour be given that opportunity to be the premier edge rushers and go after the quarterback. And, it's going to take maybe, the secondary giving them an extra second or so to try to get after the quarterback. But it's one of those things where it's like they have to help each other out. You can't have a great secondary without having a good pass rush. You can't have a great pass rush without having a good secondary. So it's one of those things where you're going to need more cohesion. You're going to need both groups to be able to help each other out in certain spots. But in terms of just scheme and how you're dialing things up as defensive coordinator, I really hope that they get, creative. Creative is probably the word that I'm looking for. Try to confuse the offenses. Don't just line up in 4-3 and hope for the best or in a standard nickel package, because there's obviously a lot of passing in today's version of football. But let's see a little bit of creativity. Let's send some guys from different places, be it cornerback blitzes, be it, blitz from the left, blitz from the right, maybe send a safety from the right and a linebacker from the left to help out the D-line. I want to see a little bit more creativity when it comes to rushing the passer. Obviously, personnel will decide just how successful that all is and how well things go, but for me, I want to see more creativity from this defense. But that's the coaching staff that we're looking at leading the way for the Breakers this year. My fellow Breakers fans, let me know what you're thinking. How are you feeling? Comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. But that is it for me. I appreciate you if you made it all the way to the end of the video. I will see you all next time. Have a good one.